I'm so thankful to be here. When I attend these kind of events, I feel like I'm part of the Lincoln family. Lincoln's relatives are, of course, have all passed, but those who continue to honor his legacy, like so many in this room do, week after week, are really part of a family. And there are so many events, of course, here in Spencer County, but throughout the country, and I continually see the same faces time and again, and it really does feel like a family. Part of that are those who took part in this, and that includes my brothers and the sons of Union veterans of the Civil War, of which I'm a part. We have the scouts here who, as mentioned earlier, are taking up the next generation. My son is part of that. And it brings me such joy, but also hope to see that we continue to honor and remember these types of roots. I'm also grateful that although it's brisk outside, the weather is at least not raining. As we say here in Indiana, we don't complain about the weather, we just wait 5 minutes. The inverse of that is true as well, though I have to be careful about being grateful of it because 5 minutes later it could turn. But at least right now, things look good for our walk up. Today, I'm very excited to talk about Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's journey from frontier obscurity to the heights of American leadership is often celebrated as the ultimate story of self-reliance and perseverance. We admire his unmatched eloquence, moral clarity, and unwavering determination. Yet, beneath this familiar narrative lies a quieter but profoundly influential voice and force, and it's the enduring legacy of his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Today, I invite you to reflect with me not on Lincoln as the towering figure of history, but on one woman who helped shape the core of his being. Nancy Hanks Lincoln's story is one of quiet resilience in the face of relentless hardship. She lived a life marked by sacrifice, faith, and an unwavering commitment to her family. Though her life was cut short, her influence echoes across the years, woven into the moral and intellectual fabric of the man who led our nation through its darkest hour. It reminds us that even the greatest among us are shaped by unseen hands. But who was Nancy Hanks Lincoln? What was the source of her strength? How did her character, forged in the hardships of frontier life, shape her son and, through him, the course of American history? In the wilderness of Indiana, surrounded by dense forests and the challenges of frontier living, she nurtured values of empathy, determination, and integrity that would guide her son through the crucible of leadership. Her story deserves our attention not just as a footnote in the life of a president, but as a testament to the power of unsung heroes, the mothers, fathers, teachers, and mentors whose quiet influence shapes the trajectory of history. All of us in this room fall in one of those categories. And whether you're famous or your son becomes a president, in some way, I think this reminds us of all of our quiet influences. Nancy reminds us of the enduring truth that greatness often begins in obscurity. Her life teaches us that the strongest legacies are not always built with fanfare, but with love, sacrifice, and an unyielding spirit. Today, let us honor her contributions by delving into her story, one that resonates far beyond her time and family, touching the very fabric of our national identity. Nancy was likely born on February 5th, 1784, and she entered the world as the illegitimate daughter of Lucy Hanks in what was then Virginia, now West Virginia. Unclaimed by her father, she carried her mother's surname, a silent marker of her circumstances. Despite these humble beginnings, Nancy's son, Abraham, would later honor her as a profound influence on his life and legacy. He believed his sharp mind, logical reasoning, and unrelenting ambition stemmed from her and her, quote, well-bred but unnamed father. For Lincoln, his mother being born out of wedlock was not necessarily a hindrance in all respects. It could also be a source of vitality and brilliance, traits he saw reflected himself. The first known mention of Nancy's illegitimacy came in early 1850s during a trip Lincoln took with his law partner, William Herndon. In a rare moment of candor, Lincoln shared a deeply personal revelation, asking Herndon to keep it secret during his lifetime. Lincoln said, and I quote, "Billy, I'll tell you something, but keep it a secret while I live. My mother was a bastard, was the daughter of a nobleman, so-called, of Virginia. My mother's mother was poor and credulous, and she was taken shamefully advantage of by the man. My mother inherited her qualities, and I hers. All that I am or hope to be, I get from my mother. God bless her." Years later, Herndon softened this account, describing Nancy's father as a, quote, well-bred Virginia farmer or planter. He also recalled Lincoln's somber demeanor after telling the story, writing, "Lincoln immediately lapsed into silence. He was sad and absorbed, burying himself in thought and musing, no doubt, over the disclosure he had just made." Even during his 1860 presidential campaign, Lincoln was careful about what he revealed regarding his mother's ancestry. When providing material for a biography by journalist John Locke Scripps, he praised Nancy's intellect and moral strength, but withheld deeper details. Scripps later wrote to Herndon, noting, "Mr. Lincoln communicated some facts to me concerning his ancestry, which he did not wish to have published." Nancy's parentage has long intrigued historians, sparking debates that blur the lines between fact and legend. Various theories have emerged about her father, often influenced by societal expectations or personal biases. Some of his contemporaries, including Illinois Governor Richard Oglesby and members of the extended Lincoln family, sought to refute claims of her illegitimacy, crafting narratives that fit Victorian ideals of respectability. These efforts aim not only to protect Nancy's honor, but also to protect Lincoln's reputation in an era when lineage held great social weight. By the late 19th century, competing claims about Nancy's ancestry fueled intense debates among historians. But modern advancements, such as DNA research, have confirmed Nancy's connection to the Hanks family, silencing some speculation while still leaving the identity of her specific father a mystery. Nancy's life, marked by the isolation of frontier existence and the stigma of illegitimacy, offers a unique lens for understanding her son. Lincoln's acknowledgement of her unconventional origins, coupled with his reverence for her virtues, reflects his nuanced view of heritage. For him, Lincoln's life was both a source of shame, but also inspiration. In her early years, Nancy found a fragile sense of stability under the care of her grandparents, Joseph and Nanny Hanks, in the rugged yet picturesque terrain near Knob Creek, Kentucky. The area's rolling hills and winding creek offered a natural beauty that masked the hardships of frontier life. Farming there was a daily struggle. The soil was rocky, the yields were modest. Although life at Knob Creek offered her fleeting stability, the tides of misfortune soon turned, setting her adrift in a series of events that would profoundly shape her character and future. When she was 9, her grandfather Joseph died, uprooting her once again. She stayed briefly with her grandmother Nanny, but grief and a desire to return to Virginia soon drove Nanny to leave Kentucky. Within a year, Nanny herself passed away, leaving Nancy untethered. The family farm was sold, and Nancy was sent to Mercer County to live with her mother, Lucy, and her stepfather, Henry Sparrow. This transition brought new challenges for Nancy. Once, she was the youngest family of a bustling household filled with aunts and uncles, but she now found herself the eldest in a smaller, less familiar family. With her mother preoccupied and her stepfather focused on providing for the family, Nancy took on the care of her younger siblings, shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years. Even her identity shifted. Neighbors began referring to her as Nancy Sparrow, a subtle but significant redefinition that reflected her ever-changing place in the world. Amid the instability, a glimmer of hope arrived when her aunt, Betsy Hanks, entered her life with an offer of care. Betsy married Henry Sparrow's brother, Thomas, and together, Betsy and Thomas effectively adopted Nancy, offering her the closest thing to parental stability she had ever known. They provided her with shelter, affection, and the limited education available on the frontier. Years later, Abraham Lincoln would speak of his mother's adoptive parents with warmth and gratitude, calling Betsy Granny, a title that captured the enduring bond she had formed with her niece. Meanwhile, Nancy's biological mother and stepfather faded into the background, known to Nancy and her children simply as Uncle Henry and Aunt Lucy. Despite the stability Betsy and Thomas provided, Nancy could not escape the social stigma of her birth. In both Kentucky and Indiana, she was labeled, quote, base-born. Such cruel labels likely left deep emotional scars, shaping the quiet resilience she exhibited throughout her life. Scholars have suggested that these early struggles contributed to the depression that shadowed both Nancy and Abraham. While the exact connection is impossible to prove, the hardships she endured undoubtedly forged the remarkable strength of character that would define her legacy. Nancy's experiences on the frontier, her struggles of identity, loss, and adversity shaped her. The Hanks family's story, rooted in hardship and perseverance, instilled in her qualities that emerged later in her son: empathy for the marginalized, an unwavering determination, and the ability to endure in the face of overwhelming challenges. In the early 1800s, the family moved frequently, shuttling between Hardin County and Mercer County. This constant movement reflected the relentless, uncertain life of the American frontier. During this time, little Nancy had grown into a young woman, shaped by the trials of those early years. No portraits of Nancy exist, leaving us to rely on the recollections of those who knew her. These accounts, though fragmented and sometimes inconsistent, paint a fascinating picture. She had dark hair and hazel eyes, and her complexion was described as anything from dark to exceedingly fair, likely shaped by fading memories or biases of the time. Standing an impressive 5 feet 11 inches tall, exceptional for her time, even our time, she had a slender, delicate frame. While not considered conventionally beautiful, she was described as moderately good-looking, a comment that reflects as much on frontier sensibilities as much on her actual features. Her distinct physical characteristics led an unremarkable mark on her son. Her long arms, broad forehead, and prominent nose would become iconic features of Abraham. High cheekbones, a defined chin, large ears, and a wide mouth, what some called a stringy neck, were also traits shared between mother and son. But her true legacy wasn't her physical likeness. It was her character, her sharp intelligence, quiet strength, and unmistakable determination that truly defined her and deeply influenced her son. Even before Abraham Lincoln rose to prominence, Nancy's intellect and fortitude were widely recognized. John Locke Scripps, writing a campaign biography of Lincoln, described her as possessing, quote, remarkable intellectual strength and force of character. In an era that often overlooked the contributions of women, Nancy stood out, a woman of quiet substance and enduring influence. In her Kentucky community, Nancy was admired for her domestic skills, especially as a seamstress. Neighbors sought her out to make clothing for weddings, funerals, and other important occasions. Her meticulous attention to detail and pride in her work were traits her son would later carry on into his own endeavors. Like many frontier lives, Nancy's story was interwoven with myth. One colorful tale depicts her dancing and shouting with fervor at a church camp meeting, a vivid, if likely fabricated image of her passion and energy. Her journey eventually led her to Nolan Creek in Hardin County, Kentucky, where she met Thomas Lincoln. Thomas, like Nancy, had been tempered by hardship, and together they forged a life of determination, resilience, and hope, a life that would lead them to the untamed lands of Indiana and set the stage for history. Thomas, a carpenter and farmer, was a man of modest demeanor, steady work ethic, and unshakable integrity. Their courtship was not extensively documented, but on June 12, 1806, they were married by Jesse Head, a Methodist preacher, beginning a life together that would be defined by both hardship and perseverance. Thomas provided Nancy with a measure of stability, building their first home on Sinking Spring Farm near Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Life on the farm, like most on the frontier, was a daily struggle. The rocky soil was difficult to work, and the demands of subsistence farming were relentless. But, by all accounts, Nancy and Thomas faced these challenges together, side by side. Their first child, Sarah, was born in 1807. They unfortunately had a son that tragically died in infancy. And then, on February 12, 1809, Nancy gave birth to Abraham Lincoln. Though Sinking Spring Farm offered a foundation, it was far from secure. Kentucky's land titles were often contested, and Thomas became engaged in legal disputes that forced them to relocate to Knob Creek in 1811. They leased land in hope of creating a more stable life, and for a time it seemed like that had worked. The farm offered better conditions, and Abraham would later recall his earliest experiences there with a sense of fondness. But by 1816, the Lincolns faced another turning point. They made the monumental decision to leave Kentucky and venture into the untamed lands of Indiana. The decision was driven by a mix of necessity and principle, the promise of inexpensive fertile land, the hope of escaping the endless legal disputes over property, and Thomas's deep opposition to slavery, which had taken root and spread in Kentucky. While these early years demanded constant effort, Nancy's steadfastness as a wife and mother became the glue that held the family together. Nancy's role in these geographic transitions can't be overstated. She helped clear the land and establish the farm while tending her children and maintaining the household. Her strength and resourcefulness were indispensable as the family faced the isolation and relentless demands of frontier life. The Lincolns' new home, deep in the wilderness of what, of course, is now Spencer County, offered its own set of challenges: dense forests, harsh winters, and the isolation of frontier life. Here, Nancy Hanks Lincoln once again became integral to her family's survival, clearing land, planting crops, and holding her family together. But Nancy's impact went beyond the physical labor demanded by frontier life. She shaped her children's values and intellect, giving them the tools to navigate the world often marked by hardship. With little more than the Bible and a few other texts at hand, she taught Abraham's stories and lessons, instilling in him a love of learning and a moral compass that would guide him the rest of his life. Her presence was a living example of dignity, compassion, and perseverance. Whether offering kindness to a neighbor or teaching her children about the value of honesty and hard work, Nancy showed, not just told, what it meant to live with character. These lessons would leave an indelible mark on Abraham, who carried them into adulthood and, of course, into history. But frontier life was unforgiving. In 1818, Nancy fell ill with what was known as milk sickness, caused by consuming tainted milk or meat. Her death on October 5th left the family reeling. Abraham, just 9 years old, stood witness to his mother's final moments. Her burial was simple, just a grave near their home, up the hill here. But the loss was profound. For young Abraham, her passing was more than just a personal loss. It was a moment that forced him to grapple with life's fragility and his own responsibilities. Yet in the silence left by her absence, her lessons grew louder. Her values of empathy, resilience, and integrity became the foundation for the man he would become. Nancy may have been laid to rest in the Indiana wilderness, but her legacy lived on in her son, echoing in his words, his decisions, and his leadership. Nancy Hanks Lincoln's legacy is not defined to the shadows of history, nor merely a prelude to her son's accomplishments. Her unwavering moral clarity, resilience, and quiet acts of love continue to resonate through the life and leadership of Abraham Lincoln. In the wilderness of Indiana, she nurtured values of empathy, determination, and integrity that would come to define a president and a nation. Her life reminds us, again, that greatness often begins in obscurity, nurtured by the unseen sacrifices of those who shape us. As we reflect on her story, We honor not only the mother of a president, but also the universal truth of enduring influence, the quiet heroism of those whose legacy ripples across generation, transforming lives and shaping history. Thank you.